The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is brought to you in part by Mays Sandwich Shop, serving delicious hometown favorites to the West Lawn community since 1947. You are listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show, bringing you the latest news and commentary on baseball.
The 0-2 pitch, swing and a miss, struck him out! The Philadelphia Phillies are 2008 World Champions of Baseball!
Hockey.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Flyers are going to win the Stanley Cup! The Flyers win the Stanley Cup!
College football.
But now Blackledge is going to put it up on first down. He's going for the bundle. Garrity! Touchdown!
And the NFL.
The Denver Broncos are world champions. They have just won Super Bowl 50.
Now, here are your hosts, Joe Mays and Justin Raffoff.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 208th episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Mays, and sitting next to me is my co-host, Justin Raffoff.
Yeah, it's good to be back. This was, a crazy week in terms of, lots of different sports stuff going on. In regards to our show, kind of focused on the second half of the week. And I was going to say also crazy because, we often refer to life, having getting in the way kind of our sport. Not that it's a bad thing, but just we have other responsibilities that don't allow us to always sit down and watch sporting events together. It's usually a rare occasion that actually happens, and it's usually a big deal. And it happened this week, so that indicates that it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and it's probably actually this year probably a smaller deal than it usually is.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think that the Eagles picked second, but I guess when the drama's taken out of it, it's not as we talked about it last week before it started. 98% chance of what happening. Is
that's one of the things that happens when you trade up as well. When you trade up,
you're going
generally
to get
they
someone.
know who you're going to go get. If you're there just because you
were terrible,
quote unquote, earned it, then there's a little bit more. Kind of open-endedness. And that's exactly what happened in the top part of the draft. The teams that had traded up, everyone kind of knew the direction they were going, and the teams that hadn't traded up, teams that had kind of earned their way to a high pick because they're terrible years, Cowboys, there's a little more intrigue there on what they're going to do.
Yeah, so we're going to go over the 2016 NFL Draft, which completed yesterday evening or last night. 253 picks in the books through 7 rounds, and we're going to talk about a few teams.
That's an odd number, too. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. I think usually 254. I wonder why. They're missing a pick. I wonder whose that was. Alluding to the teams that we usually talk about, there's usually 6 teams that we talk about. Eagles, Cowboys, Ravens, Steelers, Dolphins, Patriots. Now, when I went through everything, just to refresh my memory and what people did in some of the picks that I missed, I don't have a lot to say about any of those 6 teams, which is neither good nor bad. It just is.
Yeah.
We will talk, we'll touch on probably all 6, but, spoiler, only one of those 6 is in my winners or losers section.
Right. Which, again, it kind of is, okay,
It's just, right. The entire process is a wait and see. You don't know. It's all on paper.
Absolutely.
Sometimes things look great and they end up being terrible. Sometimes you're like, what were they doing? And they're like, wow, that was great. 3 years down the line, you're like, that was a good draft.
Yep.
But right now you might be like, that's awful. But going off of, what we know of these players in college, the schemes that the NFL teams run, where they're going to fit, when they'll play, we can just do what we do best and take a wild guess of how these drafts are going to play out on the field.
I don't know if it's something that you and I had actually shared or if it's something that I just saw while I was here watching the draft. But it talked about keeping – this was Thursday night, mind you, so round 1. It's like keep this in mind when everybody's ripping the people who hype up college recruiting news so much. It said only I think 7% of high school recruits are 4-star or 5-star recruits coming out. This is for football, obviously. It said, however, and it listed since whatever year, 70% of your first round draft picks are 4-star and 5-star, former 4-star and 5-star recruits.
Right.
So it's it's just like, well, yes, it's not the only thing that goes into it. When you're getting a kid out of high school and going to college, lots of things can happen. There's a strong relationship there between your skill set and being drafted in the first round.
I mean, what makes you a 4 or 5-star prospect is going to be your physical traits, your height, weight, strength, or the ability to add or subtract from those categories. Now, I know height kind of not so much, but weight and strength, that's in your control. And you can change that. Same thing even with speed to some extent. You can learn how to run better.
Right.
Become more agile.
Yep.
Those are all things you can change, and they're ranking you based on that. Productivity matters too, but a lot of it is potential.
Right.
And 70%, like Justin said, first round picks were 4 or 5-star guys. So yeah, there's always going to be the mainstream media and even blogs and people out there just like us like to pick out the exception and point to it, but it's a reason that it's an exception. Right. There might have been 100 that were to a T the way you expected, and then there was a one outlier. What is the best one when it comes to the NFL to talk about? You don't need a quarterback in the first round because you know what? There's another Tom Brady out there. Yeah. The 199th pick, how often does that turn out to be that?
Yeah. Also,
one time.
Just wait, everybody's looking for the quarterback who lost his starting job to a guy who decided not to play football at first and played baseball for the Yankees instead. Everybody's looking for that guy. It's just, it ties into a whole nother New England quarterback topic that we'll talk about some other time.
Oh, we'll got plenty to talk about on New England quarterbacks.
I've already heard some like big time radio guys just saying like how interesting it'll be this year if Brady's not playing those first 4 games and how New England does in those things. So we'll talk about that some other time. However, like you said, the draft was this week. A lot of teams, that we generally talk about pretty much did what we expected them to do based on our show. We talked about that last week. They addressed some of their needs. They didn't necessarily address them in the way that we thought they would, but it'd be pretty interesting to see how that kind of plays out.
We got plenty of draft talk to get to, but before we do that, we want to get the contact info up and also get to an email that we have sitting here waiting for us from just a few days ago from the evening of the draft beginning on Thursday. So Justin has ways that you can get in contact with us right now.
Yeah, so we'd love to have you talk about the show or call us to talk about the topics that we're going to discuss on the show today. You can call the Mace Sandwich Shop hotline at 530-563-6297. Again, 530-563-6297. You can also email the show anytime during the week at joemazeandjraff@gmail.com. Again, joemazeandjraff@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Both of those social media sites are great ways to interact with us. We try to post as much as we can to keep people entertained and alert as to what's going on in the sports world. So if you could like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at @JoeMazeandJraff, we'd appreciate it. Okay, so let's go right into the Maze Sandwich Shop email inbox with an email from none other than Rich, the Pats fan. He's got a bunch to say to us, as he usually does. And we just want to make it known to him, if he's out there watching, that we're doing this show at 2:30 for you, man, because you requested it, because you said you can't watch the whole show when we do it at night. So here we are in the afternoon, just for you. Has nothing to do with our schedules. This is all for you.
Yeah, we're all about our loyal listeners.
Right. So, all right, Rich, what do you got to say? He starts out, I knew that you would be waiting for me to write after all the things that went down this week. Yes, I'm talking about the Eagles taking Carson Wentz as their new quarterback while giving a bunch of draft picks and angering their current quarterback. Okay, I really want to make a quick comment about the great commissioner of pro football. Since this is a family-oriented show, I'll try to talk in the PG version. New England Patriot fans are very upset that he made that part PG. It looks like the Patriots are really being punished for past discretions, and the 4-game suspension will be in effect, and Roger Goodell is still the judge, jury, and executioner. Plus, he is the only one who can overturn himself, made possible by Rule 46. Fat chance. He can say this is not about Brady, but about his power given to him by the NFL owners and the Players Association, but we know better. Now, even with the 4-game suspensions of Brady and the loss of our first and fourth picks in this year's draft, the Patriots still have the best coach and quarterback and will still win the AFC East. Sorry, Joey. Now, looking at Game 5 against the dreaded Cleveland Browns, Brady will be back and will be looking to kick some behind. Again, PG version. As Yamamoto stated, I'm afraid we have awoken a sleeping giant. Now, besides death and taxes, the only thing certain, I would say Commissioner Goodell will never set foot in Gillette Stadium. All right, that is my tangent, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about your take on this week's draft. And he went on to say about how he would prefer we have the show in the afternoon. Your loyal listener and Patriots fan, Rich. All right, so we got at least 2 or 3 things to talk about quickly. First one I want to address, and he kind of points this out, but I do want to say that Goodell being the judge, jury, and executioner is the player's fault. So I don't want to hear any whining about it. Whether or not it's from Rich or Patriots fan, it's really anyone. And I'm sick and tired of the people hating on Goodell. Like, I understand the Patriots fans. That's fine. You know, if I was in that situation, I probably would too. But everyone else, I just don't get it. Like, stop.
It's just the easy thing
The
to do.
people
It's
booing at the draft, like, you are morons.
Like, I honestly was like, wait, we're in Chicago. Like, what's going on?
But it's just,
like,
well,
if it was in Boston, okay, I get it. You know, if it's somewhere like, I understand, and like there's some degree that it's like, okay, you know, it's kind of like amusing because it's almost expected, whether that's right or wrong. Like, but like, okay, you know, give him the playful boo, and then when he starts to talk, just be quiet. And they kept booing.
This vocal minority just won't shut up about stuff like this, and they just harp on the same thing, and they just. I don't understand what exactly they okay. If he leaves, what changes?
Nothing.
I'm asking,
Nothing.
what changes if he leaves?
And this is one of the interesting things too, because I think it's more than I agree with you. The players and the Players Association agreed to the deal, and so they have to live with it until it's up. But I also like, and I brought this up before, that we're now getting to the point where some of the owners, including Bob Kraft, who was a really close ally with Goodell, years ago, but there are rumored that about a third of the owners don't agree with the decision, or I shouldn't say publicly because they didn't do it publicly, but don't agree with it. So it is interesting in that sense because some of them are starting to get this idea of, well, we don't necessarily like the exact wording either, but they agreed to it as well, and it's like, well, look, this is what everyone agreed to. Everyone agreed to this. So that's the current situation we have until it comes up. And you know what's going to happen next time. This is going to become a big deal, and the owners are going to say, all right, well, then here are some of the other things we're going to throw in to do it. And it's going to go back and forth. And in my opinion, this is setting up for a huge dispute, for lack of a better word, or that they're going to have to overcome next time they do their negotiations, which who knows when that'll be, because the owners have the option to opt out in like a year or two, I think.
Right. I don't know when the CBA will come to, a head where...
I think the players have like 6 years left or something till they could not
it's
sign.
It's early 2020.
Right, but I think the owners, I think it was like 2017, 2018, the owners could opt out.
In the next year or two.
Right.
So
that all involves television money, all that other crazy stuff.
Right, but you're right. I mean, one of the things they're going to want is they're going to want to take the power away from the commissioner in terms of, disciplinary function.
Right.
And like you said, some of the owners are like, maybe we should get rid of that. So the owners are going to have a huge win there for that.
Right. The owners, and essentially the owners, I think, are going to want to get rid of it, but they're going to view it as, all right, well, we can get something we want in return. So I don't know if we start to see the 18-game schedule or whether we start to see, I don't know, different split in the money. I have no idea.
I don't ever want it. Like, I don't want it to sound like I'm always defending these billionaires, because I really don't care about the owners. I care about, what do we talk about all the time? I care about the Shield, the league. I don't care about the people. Like, I don't care about the owners. I don't care about Goodell. But like, in the end, I want the guys to come out on top that is going to keep the league at the highest level. And I'm sorry, that's not the players. I know the players are the people doing it,
right,
but the ones that keep the league on top as the greatest American sport out there and arguably in the world, like, you can't get into basketball territory.
Right.
When you get into basketball territory, that is when the NFL is going to start falling apart.
Right, because But I feel like we're so far away from that because it's just a different dynamic. You're talking about 53-man roster versus
Oh yeah,
a 12-man
it's
roster.
tough to compare. Right.
You're talking about a sport where you cannot win with one superstar in the NFL.
No.
You can win. You're not going to win a Super Bowl with one
With
good player,
one good
though.
player, no.
Whereas, it's very different. And you could argue you're not going to win with one superstar in the NBA anymore, the way things have gone. It's kind of swung
You need
so
a trio.
far. Right, yeah.
So,
Especially if you're LeBron, you need like 5 or 6 All-Stars.
all right, so let's go to his next point here, which is
throwing them out
a
today.
real fast one. He says the Patriots still have the best coach and quarterback and will still win the AFC East, and he apologizes. I don't think he needs to apologize because I think everyone still knows that.
Yeah, who's not picking them?
Right,
First
yeah.
of all, he mentioned it here. I'm afraid we have wakened a sleeping giant. I wholeheartedly agree, Rich, and I think when that time comes for our AFC East predictions, you will see that that's kind of where we fall. Now, this is kind of a split though because somebody said like, what happens? And this is your favorite guy, by the way. Well, actually, you probably won't be your first guess for favorite guy, but I've said this before.
List.
Right, I've said this before, so I'm just happy when I hear someone else repeat it, like on a national TV or national radio show. And he said, "What happens if they go like 3-1 without Brady, and then they come back and they lose a game or two with Brady? Like, what happens? They're like, because are you telling me Brady's not at all going to be worried that Bill Belichick is going to bench the guy who's making more money in the veteran quarterback for the young upstart quarterback?
Right.
He's like,
that could be
don't
his
think
future.
for a second that Brady isn't worried about getting Bledsoed. They're like, that's why.
It's a full circle. It's like a circle.
Right,
It's just the way that it works.
And so, yeah, he thought it was Bomani, but yeah, I know.
He's not at the top of the list.
Right, not even close to the top.
No,
of the list.
he's on the list, but he's pretty far down there. So thank you for the email, Rich. Hopefully you're listening today, and if you're not listening live, you can listen a bit later on jmnjrradio.com or JoeMasonJRaffShow.com or in your iTunes or Google Play podcast library. So let's move right on to the main topic, the NFL draft. Again, I said 7 rounds, 253 picks through Thursday to Saturday. We all knew who the first pick was going to be, or we expected it to be, and it was Cal quarterback Jared Goff. He went to the Rams, who had traded up with the Titans a few weeks ago. Goff's the 10th California quarterback to be drafted, and he's the second number one. The last being in 1975 was Steve Bartkowski. Goff was the 5th first-round quarterback from Cal, but he's the first since some guy named Aaron Rodgers. I know you might be familiar with his work.
He's stuck around in the league somehow.
Yeah, a little bit. He's hung around. He's done a pretty good job. The Rams have drafted a quarterback at number 1 for the second time in their history, but the second time in the last 6 years. Their last was some guy by the name of Sam Bradford.
Yeah, that kind of tells you how that played out, doesn't it? Yeah.
So Sam Bradford, he'll probably come up in conversation in a few minutes here.
Yeah.
And looking at the Rams and their draft in terms of quarterbacks throughout any round, any of the year, and all these stats are coming from 1970 on, which is the most recent merger period, was 1970. The Rams in drafting quarterbacks, not that great, especially when you consider most of the guys that I'm going to say didn't do much, if any, of their work with the franchise.
Rams, right.
So, Bradford was obviously up there, but he wasn't in the top 4 or 5 that I looked at. So Goff doesn't have a huge hill to climb.
No.
But the best ever drafted by the Rams, arguably either Ron Jaworski, who made his name with the Eagles,
Right.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's playing right now.
He's made his name with everyone else.
Every other team except the Rams. Or Doug Flutie, who didn't play a single game for the Rams.
Made a name, again,
as a Bill.
everywhere else.
Right. Same with Fitzpatrick. He broke onto the scene with the Bills.
So you look at that, their best quarterback is probably Kurt Warner. Like, if you have to look at it that way.
Right, not
probably.
technically not drafted.
Right,
by
no,
them.
not drafted. But I just mean, like, ever. So that's not necessarily a knock because that's also a great thing to build teams is getting guys that weren't drafted.
Yeah, right.
However,
Undrafted, it's great.
Yeah, it's terrible when if you're picking a quarterback number 1 overall. Now again, it's a little skewed because they didn't win or / lose their way into that number 1 pick. They had to trade up for it.
Right.
But Sam Bradford didn't pan out for them. And then they traded for Nick Foles, and this kind of ties into the second pick, which is fine. But the Eagles and Rams swapped quarterbacks and things like that before last season.
And it didn't work out for either of them.
Yeah, and you want to talk about one of the worst trades in NFL history. That's a little misleading because worst trades could be where someone wins and someone really loses. You could look at
this wasn't a bad trade.
Like the Herschel Walker trade.
Right.
That can be a best trade in NFL history or worse, depending on what side you're looking at.
How you're looking at it. The context matters.
This, in terms of everybody lost, it might be the worst trade. Not. I'm sure there are ones that are worse, but this is a terrible trade when you look back, and neither team got what they wanted at. And I know the Eagles take heat for giving Bradford money, but so did the Rams give Foles money. That it didn't work out really well, and everyone who was kind of questioning it from both sides before is still left kind of wondering what were they doing. One major difference is that the coach who kind of orchestrated a lot of those moves in Philly is now gone, and the coach in St. Louis / LA is still there. So there's a lot of talk around that too. How long does Jeff Fisher have in LA? Now it's kind of interesting. First of all, he's a California guy. I think he played at USC.
He did.
And so, he's got to be thrilled about this move to LA. There's a lot of hype around the team, all this stuff, and they've got to feel like they got their guy because they traded up to get Goff. So he has to be their guy moving forward. I don't know. I am a Jeff Fisher guy. I like Jeff Fisher. I like what he did. Most of that, though, is probably based off of his work with the Titans. Because in reality, with the Rams, he took them from a terrible team to a decent team, but they haven't been able to kind of cross that threshold when they've had some of the pieces in place. So we'll kind of have to see how that all plays out. But I think Jeff Fisher, he's in a good position in the sense that they weren't a terrible team last year, and they still got the number 1 overall pick. But I think along with that, the expectations are going to start to be really high. So they're going to need to see a step in the right direction this year. Whereas when you're drafting the number 1 overall quarterback, generally there's a little bit larger of a grace period, not necessarily, to be drafting in the top 5 again, but people understand, this team was terrible last year, blah, 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 blah. I think the hype around this team and the situation with their draft, I feel like they're going to really want, a 500 or better season next year.
Yeah, you would expect it to be that way, and I don't know that they're
going
to get
a division
it.
That's going to help them out there.
Right. So we'll see. But moving on to the second pick, and we're not obviously going through the whole first round like this. We've got a lot of other stuff to do. But the first 2 picks are kind of important. The second pick, like we talked about last week, we expected it to happen, and it did. The Eagles, after trading up with the Browns, stayed at 2 and took North Dakota State quarterback Carson Wentz. Obviously, quarterback of the future. Is he going to be quarterback now? I would say doubtful, depending. I mean, even though we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Bradford, and literally a day after we were on here, and you said that Bradford would be the starting quarterback, that's when everything hit the fan, and he kind of was like, I want out. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to be the starting quarterback, because there's millions, literally, of reasons that he should be the starting quarterback. But even if he would, hold out, whatever, literally sit around and not do anything and forgo all that money, I still think Daniel will start, Chase Daniel, over Wentz.
And you think of it, you're like, oh man, they just brought in Chase Daniel. Yeah, but he was in the exact same system last year in Kansas City.
Right.
So he knows the offense.
Yeah, he'll
if
be fine.
anyone's losing out, it's Sam Bradford.
Definitely.
Because Wentz is already there, starting to get his feet on the ground. Bradford is also learning a new system again, and I know that's not the ideal situation, but he has every opportunity. He was basically handed the wheel to this. Everybody in Philly wanted him to be the guy this year, and he's basically saying no. He's taking his ball and going home. And the Eagles are like, all right, but don't forget, at a certain time, we get to take the ball back. That's basically what's happening.
I feel that he's getting really bad direction from his agent, or he's not listening to his agent.
I've seen things of it's unfair of the Eagles to paint him as a crybaby.
No,
Most
he's doing
of that
that
was
himself.
him and his agent painting himself as a crybaby.
I don't really understand. You had to think that this is a possibility of happening.
Right. What have you done? What have you done ever to say, you know what, you probably shouldn't draft a quarterback. You don't need a quarterback. A quarterback is not an area of need on this team. At what point in his career, post-Oklahoma, And even there, because he was injured all the time, has he been at a point where you're like, you know what, we really don't need a quarterback to take us to the next level. Like, I understand that it would be frustrating, but what argument does he have against it? Like, what, Now,
And where was he going to go?
If he went into those, like, discussions and was like, and the Eagles had told him, look, we are not drafting a quarterback. All right, I'd be pretty mad if they told me they weren't going to draft a quarterback, and then they ended up doing that. But we know that's not what happened. Like, they may not have, at the time, obviously, they didn't know that they were going to get the number 2 pick. Like, they didn't necessarily know that. But there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't have, like, looked to get a quarterback at all. Like, that's just silly. And you know what? If he plays well, if he would have just taken it and played well, they still had him as the starter. Like, if he plays well, it's his. He's only going to make himself more money. But instead, he's pouting, and he'll be rewarded. He'll get his money because he'll show up when he has to get his money. And, he'll probably play part of this year, and then the Eagles will cut him or he'll get traded. Interesting side note is that when it came up that, the Eagles may listen to offers if they're good enough, it came out that he said, don't trade me to San Francisco. I don't want to go to play for Chip Kelly. Well,
now you're just limited.
Beggars can't be choosers,
right?
All right.
But
I went out, but I don't want to go there. Well, that's not how it works in football. There aren't no trade clauses.
Well, I mean,
generally.
there can be, but they're rare. They're not.
Right.
It's not like baseball.
Sam Bradford's
or hockey.
not earning a no trade clause, basically.
And also, like, and you can look at it. Is Bradford better than Kaepernick? Like, Kaepernick's better for Kelly's system.
Right. No. Well, yeah. Why would Chip Kelly trade for him? Is a good question we should have asked a year ago, but. It's just one of those things that I don't get it.
Where else is he going to go? I mean, we said 49ers, the Broncos were the option, the Jets. They don't want to pay Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Right.
Why are they going to pay Sam Bradford?
Right. And
Fitzpatrick knows the system. If they're going to pay someone, they might as well pay Fitzpatrick.
Like, here's the thing. You were a free agent. You had the chance to go anywhere you wanted to go. You chose to re-sign with the Eagles, either out of necessity or out of want. And I believe it was probably more necessity, right? Because he wasn't going to get that money from a lot of other teams. And then, look what happens. Like, he thought, let's just call it, this is how I see it. And I think this is pretty close to what happened. He and his agent thought the Eagles were in a bad position. And they took advantage and got a lot of money, right? Because they know the Eagles weren't able to, they were in the middle of the draft. They weren't able to kind of get their guy last year, Mariota, like all this stuff. New coach coming in. Oh, they hired, they're going to bring in Chase Daniel, all this stuff. Well, all of a sudden, it's not a problem for the Eagles because they were able to trade up to the 2 spot. And so the guy who had all the power was Sam Bradford and his agent. They signed the deal, and now the Eagles are like, that's fine. We're still drafting a quarterback number 2. And they're like, whoa. Like, you're offended. Well, I'm offended that you're taking so much money and you're not that good. Like, that's... Could he be good? Yes. And I was the proponent of that last year, and that's somewhat of my frustrating level with some of the Eagles fans with the second pick, is a lot of them don't like Sam Bradford, and yet now they're like, well, kind of, until he's throwing the hissy fit, they're kind of like, oh, well, they don't like the guy they're drafting either. All right, so you're mad at the Eagles for not going up and getting somebody, but you're mad at them for taking somebody else. Like,
but
whatever.
It's Philly sports. This is what we're come to expect, and we're long a part of it, but we're usually on the spectrum of trying to fix it.
It's why when one of our friends, Greg, he'll ask, were you listening to whatever Philly sports radio? No. Like, I can't listen to Philly sports radio.
No, you can't.
I'll listen to national sports radio. Like, and even that I have to turn off sometimes because I'm just like, I don't care about that enough to listen. But like the Philly sports radio, I just can't stand listening and hearing everyone just complain about everything. Like, everything.
Well, none of the hosts really endear themselves to me either.
That's part of the problem. Like, because they just fuel on the whole, like...
Exactly, yeah.
This is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Whatever.
So, Wentz to the Eagles. He's the 27th North Dakota State player to ever be drafted, but he's the first ever to make it into the first round. And not too many of the 26 previous players taken have been very notable in the NFL. Probably the best and brightest, the most noteworthy is someone that Rich should be well aware of, and that was linebacker Steve Nelson, was an NDSU alum. He was drafted by the Patriots in 1974 in the early second round, and he's been 14 seasons with the team. So that's the best North Dakota State player since, and I know the Eagles fans are hoping that Carson Wentz rewrites that history book for him. And he's joining 3 current NDSU players in the NFL. Offensive tackle Billy Turner, who's with the Dolphins. He's entering his 3rd season. Last year, linebacker Kyle Emanuel was taken by the Chargers, and currently I'm also playing for the Chargers. So I'm an NDSU alum. No, linebacker Joe Mays, no relation. Was actually drafted by the Eagles and has bounced around the league and was most recently with the Chargers, but he is from North Dakota State as well. This is the 7th time since 1970 that quarterbacks have gone 1-2 in the draft, and if anyone wants to write or call in right now and tell me the other years, go ahead, because I have them listed here. And we can give it away, but if anyone's out there writing and wants to give it a shot, some of them are pretty easy. There's always going to be 1 or 2 that got lost in the shuffle, and obviously the most recent ones are the easiest ones. But it happened in back-to-back years now twice. Obviously, 2015 last season, Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota went. This year we saw Goff and Wentz. And then just a few years ago in 2012, we saw Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin. And it had been a while. 1999 was the previous time, and the Eagles fans are well aware of that one. Tim Couch and Donovan McNabb. Then just the year before that was probably the biggest 1-2, at least that I can recall, in Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf. Go back a few years, and we come upon that Patriots quarterback that you referenced just a few minutes ago, Drew Bledsoe and Rick Meyer, and then the first time, way back in 1971, Jim Plunkett and Archie Manning.
Yeah. So when you look at it, kind of overall, it's kind of interesting. And
there's one winner and one loser.
Right, one winner, one loser, and 2015 is obviously way too soon.
Way too early, yeah. But I mean, Plunkett and Manning is probably, when you compare them two, that's probably the best 2.
Yeah.
That both, like, there wasn't one bad and one
Right.
really good. Plunkett and Manning were both certain. Now, Manning, I don't believe, ever made the playoffs, but that wasn't really his fault.
Right. Everyone kind of writes it off because is he in the Hall of Fame?
I don't think so.
I don't think he is, but everybody talks about how he's a great player who was always on terrible teams.
Yeah, but Jim Plunkett, obviously, incredible
Right.
player.
But I don't think it worked. I don't think he was drafted by the team that he was actually played for most of his career. I don't know that. I think he ended up being better later on.
But Bledsoe and Meyer, I mean, everyone, you would take Bledsoe over Meyer after looking back what they did. Same thing with Manning and Leaf. That's the easiest one. Couch and McNabb, also incredibly easy. It's still early, but it's looking like Luck Griffin. You clearly want to have Luck. And then Winston Mariota too early, and obviously haven't played a single snap yet. It's Goff and Wentz. But it does appear that other than maybe Couch McNabb, the number 1 pick was the better pick.
Let's be clear. The one time where the second pick was better, it was the Eagles.
You're right. And maybe, 10 years, 15 years from now, we'll be looking back on Goff Wentz and being like, man, Jeff Fisher, you should have taken Carson Wentz.
I hope this is the move that, this sounds terrible, but I hope this is the move that makes, puts the Eagles over the top. And actually, I don't even care. If the Rams are good too, like, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with them both working out.
As long as
Wentz working out. Right.
All right, so after the quarterbacks 1 and 2, the craziness kind of began because we knew quarterbacks were going 1 and 2. Then what was going to happen at 3 with the Chargers? Because they could have gone in multiple different directions. They went with Joey Bosa from Ohio State, who we talked about last week on the show. We think that he's overrated.
Right.
We don't think that he's going to do that much in the NFL. We don't get the comparisons with J.J. Watt whatsoever.
He's a great college player. I think he'll be a fine defensive player, but I don't think he's going to be the impact you would expect out of a number 3 draft pick.
I know. From what I was reading,
Honestly,
a lot of
I
people...
would feel he'd be more in line with production-wise with like a 3rd round draft pick. That's me, and he could prove me wrong out there.
He went to the Chargers 3-4 team, so he's going to have to play standing up, linebacker. He's not playing defensive end.
Who's he going to cover?
And they already had Jeremiah Attaochu and Melvin Ingram out there, so he's going to be in a rotation probably. Maybe he'll beat one of them out as a rookie, whatever. But I just don't see it. I don't see him being the 3rd choice, and they need an offensive line. I mean, they need a lot of help out in San Diego, and I just don't know that Bosa was the answer. Then at 4, we saw the Cowboys. We thought they'd debate between Ezekiel Elliott, Jalen Ramsey, maybe a quarterback, although after those two went, you probably weren't going to be taking any of the other guys available at 4. And they went with the running back from Ohio State, Ezekiel Elliott. And
again, he's a great running back. He's a great running back. A lot of people have him as one of the best running backs to come out in a long time. However, I feel like it's been a little overlooked at the fact that, all right, so yeah, DeMarco Murray left, and everybody at first was like, it doesn't matter who they put behind that line because the line's so good, anybody could run there. There might be some truth to that. However, we didn't really get to see that last year because Romo was hurt. And when Romo's hurt and then they couldn't run, they're like, oh no, look, we lost DeMarco Murray. What happened? No, what happened was your quarterback got hurt and you couldn't complete a pass.
Right.
When Brandon Whedon's your quarterback, yeah, you're going to need a good running
you're going to
back.
have 9 guys in the box.
You're going to need Barry Sanders or Emmitt Smith back there now, and that just wasn't the case. And honestly, I don't know that would have helped him last year because Brandon Whedon still would have been the quarterback.
Right.
Ironically, Brandon Whedon ended up making the playoffs. But
he did.
So when we look at this, you're going to put a great college running back and a really high prospect behind arguably the best line in the NFL. So you would expect good things. Romo should be back. However, if Romo's healthy, couldn't you have put like a third-round running back or a free agent running back there and use that pick on something else, like, a tackle to help even add to that offensive line? Or, arguably, some people had him as the best player in the draft, Jalen Ramsey, to help you in your secondary so you're not getting scored on all the time.
Or defensive line. That's what we talked about,
right,
them needing.
Where they're already losing some of the guys that they had last year. Some of their biggest contributors
DeForest
last
Buckner,
year are
we
gone.
talked about.
Greg Hardy will not be back, according to...
Right. Well, I don't
what's
think
his name
that's
now,
a big
but-
loss. He didn't do much for them last year.
No, but
anyways.
just, yeah. You just... It's one of those things where they had other areas where they could make a large impact, and I think if you look at the pieces they have already, could they have gotten something else? They didn't. They went Ezekiel Elliott, though, and I think that's going to be a great thing, but did they miss out on really helping themselves somewhere else? Like, I don't know. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Jalen Ramsey went to the Jaguars at 5, and we're going to talk more about Ramsey and the Jags a little bit later. And then 6, the Ravens, and this is where it started to get interesting because of what had happened just before the draft started with one of, if not the best prospect in the draft, one of them in Ole Miss offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil. Offensive tackle, Ravens needed help there, but they, instead of going for Tunsil, they went with Notre Dame's Ronnie Stanley, and reportedly, now Harbaugh won't say whether this is true or not. He danced around it in the interview that I watched. Tunsil was on the board. A lot of people think he should have been the pick, but he wasn't because of what happened prior to the draft, where a video was released that just showcases the off-the-field issues and red flags that many teams found, or you didn't really have to look that hard. They were out there on Laramie Tunsil before the draft, causing him to fall all the way from 6, perhaps even higher. You don't know. Maybe the Chargers were thinking of taking him at 3. They need offensive line help. But he fell all the way to my Dolphins at 13. Probably putting an exclamation point on what was happening was when the Titans moved back up to 8 with the Browns, who had gotten it through the Eagles, who had gotten it through the Dolphins. And they took a tackle, but they took Jack Conklin, who many thought was the 3rd best tackle behind Tunsil and Stanley. So a team moved up to get a tackle and passed on one guy that a lot of people thought was
Right.
the best player in the
draft. When the Titans moved up, everybody's like, this is incredible. It's working out that they were able to trade out of number 1, move up, and still get arguably the best player in the draft in some people's views. And then they take Jack Conklin, who everybody, they
still like him,
but he's
yeah.
the 3rd tackle.
Right.
And everybody's like, oh,
Okay,
okay.
then.
That's when the talk of how far is this going
How's he
to
gonna
go?
fall? Well,
Is he going to get drafted tonight? That became a legitimate question at that point after that Titans pick.
For him, it didn't last that long, just 5 more picks. The Dolphins stopped the slide at 13, possibly getting the best player in the draft. Obviously, we won't know that for a long time, and it's hard to gauge the impact of an offensive lineman. But not a lot else to say about it.
It just got worse for him
well,
after the draft, though. It just
after
got
the
worse.
draft, he
And-
talked about Ole Miss. Did he
Well,
take money
and
from
so-
coaches to
Right.
play?
It's an
and-
interesting thing because he sat out 7 games this past year
Yep.
because of
Investigation.
quote-unquote, right, improper benefits.
Yeah.
So he was obviously coached to be able to answer that question because you're going to have that. What he was, I believe, completely unaware of was another leak of the text. This is at that time anyway that he's sitting in front of the media that are showing some rather specifics that look like basically getting paid by Ole Miss to play, and we won't get into all those details, but basically specifics on it. So he's up there, apparently coached to kind of own his mistakes, which I get. It's a better strategy than lying because the truth's going to come out anyway. But I don't think his agent and him and his PR coach
They were
or
not
whoever
prepared for
weren't
any of
prepared
that.
for the media to actually have details on stuff, and they're up there, and it becomes awkward in a hurry.
Yeah, he was ushered off the stage.
Right.
The Dolphins actually introduced him the next day, and they had to
They had to delay it.
delay and
because
postpone it because he was having an allergic reaction. So it was just crazy.
Yeah.
And just the thing, I'm so proud of my Dolphins. I have no problem with them taking him. And I said when we were watching it together with my dad Thursday night, I hope the Dolphins take him because,
how can you not? He's
There's-
arguably the best player in the
there's
draft.
question marks around him, but there's a question marks out of probably 2, 3 out of 5 guys coming into the draft because everyone has a red flag somewhere. Now, whether it's out in the
Right.
open or not, everyone has drawbacks on and off the field. But if they can get him someone to take care of him, he could be the steal of the draft, even though he was taking the top 15 picks. Now, he fell from at least 6 to 13, possibly 3 to 13. 6 to 13 cost him $7 million to drop from the Ravens pick at 6 to
and
the Dolphins at
who
13.
knows? Because a lot of this stuff supposedly wasn't all that new. So if the teams knew about it, maybe that's one of the reasons the Titans were trading out of 1. Was because they knew, look, he's not going 1, and we don't want him at 1.
Right.
And maybe that's why the Browns don't, they need help everywhere too. But maybe that's part of the reason they're teams were willing to trade back. So you have a top talent who went 13th. Not as big as some of the drops that we've seen, but still a big one for Laramie Tunsil. And I feel bad for him because it doesn't appear as any of the stuff was like actually happening right before the draft. It just that's when it was.
Yeah,
coming
I heard
out.
the video.
And it's really weird that like the instant it's breaking, TMZ is also releasing in like his stepdad who sued him, saying I didn't do it. I don't know anything about it.
Right.
Like it's just weird, and I do feel bad for him. I hope he can move past it, but he does have to address some of these things that have constantly come up. Don't get me wrong. Some of the stuff is supposedly from 4 years ago.
Well,
or
I
so,
saw the video. It was
but
2 to 5 years old.
He was still sitting out 7 games this
Right,
year
you're right.
for things,
Yep.
and was arrested last summer. Not that all of those things are in his control, but there's definitely lots of things you need to iron out. And Miami needs to make sure and needs to be confident that they can do that. And if they can, then I love the pick. Absolutely love the pick. And if they don't really have a plan for that, then that was kind of reckless on their part. But I'm sure they have something in the works.
The last thing I want to say about Tunsil is I put on him obviously the smoking and the drug use and the alcohol and the mishaps with the apartment and being involved in that incident and all that kind of stuff. That's a you decision. I mean, and it's still you for taking the money, but I don't put any blame on the players. If the college institution is illegally offering you stuff, whether it's
and
cars
let's be honest,
or direct money.
That is not a Laramie Tunsil problem
No,
anymore.
I don't.
That is an Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze problem.
That's not a red flag to me.
Especially one that was under the magnifying glass already.
Right.
Ole Miss is in a lot of trouble. He might not want to go back there to tailgate anytime soon, but
I don't put any of that on him.
It's not him.
We know that that's rampant in the SEC.
Oh my gosh.
And it probably is elsewhere too. But
Right.
everyone always talks about the SEC
Right.
almost like tongue in cheek, like
Right.
kind of like laughing it off.
Right.
Like
You know what it reminds me of?
happens all the time.
It reminds me of the early 90s when players were showing up, a la like Lenny Dykstra, who were just like, their muscles one season are just like breaking their uniforms, and everybody just kind of laughs. And he's
Zing.
like, yeah.
Wink, wink.
Right. And everybody laughed about it. And then like 10 years later, everybody's like,
It's a
holier
huge
than
deal.
now. Like,
Right,
oh, that
yeah.
was your disgrace to the game. Well, you guys were loving it, eating it all up. Like, what happened? You
All
know, that's kind of how it goes. Everybody knows it's happening, not just in the SEC, but it's definitely rampant there. And all of a sudden, you're just like, oh, well, They shouldn't be doing that.
All right, moving
Whatever.
from the prospects to the teams, let's talk about our winners and losers. And
All
I
right.
pulled out, I think, 10 teams that I thought were winners. One of them is going to get my award for best draft this year. Again, you're not going to hear many of the teams that we usually talk about. None of them are in the loser section, just, putting that out there right now. And the one you will hear about is, has a bit of a caveat to it, a little asterisk, because I think it's probably the last one I put in there, but I think their draft was very high risk, but could be huge reward in the end. So let's pull that up right here now. If you're watching on Ustream Live, you'll see the logos pop up of 9 of the 10 teams. These are the ones that I thought did themselves pretty good. And you'll also notice that none of them really are, at least recently, perennial contenders.
Right.
So you're seeing, and it kind of makes sense. If you're picking earlier in the draft, you should be picking better players. But obviously we know that doesn't always work that way. But I think this year some of them did really, really well. And just a quick run through them here. The Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, probably the best of the bunch that we're talking about here. The Cleveland Browns, the Chicago Bears, the Dallas Cowboys, the Detroit Lions, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New Orleans Saints, and the Washington Redskins. Now, you as an Eagles fan, probably not thrilled about hearing 2 fellow NFC East teams mentioned, but the Cowboys are the one that I was borderline on it. So let's talk about them briefly here, just to put a bow on their draft. We talked about, obviously, they took Ezekiel Elliott at 4. That's one of the reasons that I think it's a great pick. He was worthy of a top 10 pick. The way the running back had been trending, top 5 may be hard to swallow, but a lot of people really thought he was the real deal and better than anything Dallas has had in a long time. So I can't hate it. Very high ceiling for that, especially if the offensive line and Romo's return could really unleash him. Bad news for the NFC. Their next pick.
The key there will be Romo.
Well,
right?
yeah,
and
definitely.
That's for
and
the
whoever
Cowboys in
takes
general.
over for him.
Correct, which we'll talk about in a second.
Then their next pick, early second round, 34th overall, I think was the 3rd pick in the second round. They rolled the dice with Jalen Smith. Again, another guy who, if he would have finished his season healthy at Notre Dame, got through the bowl game without the catastrophic knee injury that he suffered, would have been a top 10 pick. A lot of people thought he was one of the best players in the entire draft.
Yeah, the quote here is, I thought he could be Luke Kuechly at the next level. Just meaning he could be that
and
dominant.
Luke Kuechly is an amazing player
Right.
for the Panthers.
Dominant linebacker.
He's a 3-down player, but he is not expected to play this year as he recovers from torn
At all.
ACL,
There's no
MCL,
chance he's going to play this year.
and it's not just the ligaments, but there's also significant nerve damage, and that was the big thing. Now, the Cowboys doctor is the one that performed the surgery, so they had a lot of inside information. Smith's brother also plays for the Cowboys, so there's a lot of connections going on. But Jalen Smith, taken by the Cowboys out of Notre Dame, stud linebacker for them. He'll be roaming all over along the outside as long as he fully heals, and we hope that he does. At least from a personal standpoint,
Well, yeah,
not in a
you
fan
hope-
rooting standpoint.
Right,
you
right.
want him to get back the way he was, but,
Right, exactly. You do hope
personal
for him.
stories. You hope that he
Absolutely.
gets back because everything you've heard about him. Great guy, and I hate on Notre Dame so much because I can't stand the program, but the players they produce deserve everything that
Did
they
you see
get.
This year's Fiesta Bowl produced 19 drafted players.
Yeah, between Ohio
Think
State
about
and Notre
that.
Dame.
And we're only was that this year? Yeah, that was this year's.
Mm-hmm.
That was this year's game. So think about like that. There's could be like a couple years
come.
worth of players that come from that. That's insane. That is insane. 19 players from one game like that, and that was a non-playoff game.
So after getting a stud offensive player, a future stud at the linebacker position, they finally get their tackle and end in Malik Collins and Charles Tapper, and then possibly maybe finding their quarterback of the future in Dak Prescott. He could have possibly gone higher. He did have that recent off-the-field issue with a DUI arrest.
I think it was more of his play this year that kind of allowed him to drop. Last year, he was kind of ended the year with things rising along with Mississippi State, and then they kind of took a step back this year, and I feel like he did too. He shows flashes, right? But I don't know. And to be a pro quarterback, you're going to need to show more than flashes. So he's got a long way to go, but, especially in the 4th round, it's worth taking that pick.
If Romo can stay healthy and Prescott can
Oh.
just learn, he has
they're
a chance.
sitting pretty.
He will
Right.
have a chance. Now the Cowboys went and added Anthony Brown, a quarterback, and Kevon Frazier, a strong safety, so they filled in their DB needs. They added another special teamers. Returner type guy in Darius Jackson from Eastern Michigan, and they finished with a project at tight end, Rico Gathers,
Who has
big
not
target.
played football since he was 13.
Right, he's a basketball player,
Right.
But
He's big.
is he the next Antonio Gates type player
He's
or
big.
Jimmy Graham?
Right.
So that Rico Gathers, tight
6'8".
end from Baylor. So I think top heavy, high risk, high reward. I have them penciled in as a winner. Again, they were my last one, but. If, and always a big if when you're talking the day after the draft concludes, if they hit on those first two guys, or even throw in Prescott, this is a home run.
Right.
That's why I have to
So-
give them. I think I give them a nod as a winner.
Their first two picks, they could have, looking maybe 2-3 years from now, the two best players in the draft in their top two.
Quite
picks.
possibly.
And that's incredible to think about.
All right, one of the other winners, the Buffalo Bills. I just like their first four picks for when they took them and when. Shaq Lawson, they needed pass rush help depending on what type of alignment they use. 4-3-3-4. Lawson will be that pass rush they need. They perhaps got the steal of the early second round in Reggie Ragland, who a lot of people thought could go in the first round. He's a stud inside linebacker from Alabama. He'll be an immediate starter. And Adolphus Washington, defensive lineman, big guy, also could step in right away. So you got three potential starters in your first three picks. That's incredible. And there was talk that they might be looking quarterback early, and they sat and waited on Cardale Jones, who's obviously a development guy. He was third string at Ohio State 2 years ago until all the injuries with Braxton Miller and JT Barrett. And he lit it up at times. He's obviously still immature, and he's got a lot of work to do as a passer. But you're taking him in the fourth round. You have other guys up there that can step in. He's a developmental guy. I think those first four picks, and then also adding Colby Listenby, who's quite possibly the fastest player in the draft and possibly in the NFL, to pair with Marquise Goodwin up there. I think Buffalo had a good draft.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, when you wait until Saturday to make that quarterback pick, if it doesn't pan out, especially right away,
No one's going to care.
You're okay. Like, if he's not dressing for games this year, I don't think anyone even expects him to be dressing for games this year. That's okay. He was your fourth-round pick. You need him to learn. And he's got some physical talent there. They just need to kind of get him in the system. Now, is Rex the guy to do that? No, obviously not him personally, but he's not shown a history of being able to develop quarterbacks the way that they should. I know he's not the offensive guy there, but it comes back to the head coach. You need a guy in place that's going to make those guys develop. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put someone in place, or if they have the guys in place to kind of develop Cardale Jones. Because if they do, the talent is there. It's just kind of getting it developed.
The Bengals are another team I thought did really well. Their first pick was William Jackson III from Houston, a cornerback. They've taken a lot of corners early recently, but in a passing league, you need as many as you can get. You also have to face Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Flacco, and I'm not even going to mention anyone the Browns have, but the elite in the AFC, obviously, you've got to sometimes take care of Andrew Luck in the passing attack. You got to take care of Brady in their passing attack because they pretty much throw every play. So having more corners is a bad thing, and obviously you're going to have injuries and free agency every year after year. So William Jackson, a great pick by the
your
Bengals.
defensive backs keep getting suspended.
Right,
so-
true, also. And then they came back and added a receiver in Tyler Boyd, who was a fringe first-round possibility, pairing him with A.J. Green.
Right.
That should be incredible, replacing Mohamed Sanu.
Right. We talked about Boyd. What I really like about that type of pick, actually, no, sorry, we did this with Will Fuller in Houston,
right.
But I feel the same way about this. Tyler Boyd, I don't see him as a number one wide receiver in the NFL, especially right now.
Doesn't need to be.
However, when you're going to line up across from A.J. Green, all of a sudden, you are better because you're not going to see their number one guy unless you're playing against a system where the guy stays on one side. Yeah, I get that. But you're not going to get the most attention on defense or from the defense. And now you've also helped your best wide receiver on the team. So it's like improving your number one guy and helping out your number two guy because you have a guy in place.
Right.
A perfect scenario. I don't think he's a number one wide receiver material right now, but studying under AJ Green or someone like that, he can develop and maybe take the reins from him down the road. But he's exactly what they need outside now. They need additional threats, legitimate other threats, and I think he can certainly be that. and definitely when he's lined up across from A.J. Green.
They recently released A.J. Hawk, and they brought in possibly his replacement in Nick Vigil in round 3. Solid pick. Don't have too much to say about that. It's the next two that I
I
thought
honestly
really
didn't know A.J. Hawk was still playing.
next two picks that I thought set the Bengals up as being one of the better, and that was them taking Andrew Billings, the defensive tackle from Baylor, and Christian Westerman, offensive lineman from Arizona State. Both guys expected to go second, maybe third round, and he lasted to the fourth and the fifth. Both guys should challenge for playing time right away. Now, they have a little bit of depth at defensive line. That Billings could be a rotational guy. Geno
But
Atkins,
they're also
obviously
older
the
on the
stud
defensive
there.
line, and they tend to get injuries. So he'll get in there and he's going to contribute.
But, I mean, he's not going to be a pass rush specialist, but when you need him to clog up the middle, Billings will do
I
that.
don't know, like when you're going against Le'Veon Bell.
True.
Yeah.
And then Westerman, I think, will have the chance to start right away at guard or possibly even center for the Bengals. And I just thought they had a good weekend.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you want to talk about a team. You said most of these teams are drafting high. They're the closest thing to a contender. Well, them and Dallas really here, year in and year out. So you look at this, it's kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Because they're a piece or two away. Everyone thought last year was the year they were doing great, and then the quarterback breaks his hand after he throws an interception. It's tough.
Now, the Browns are a team that not often mentioned in this. They made a ton of picks. I think they did well with the picks. They have a lot of picks ready for next year.
Just imagine what this is going to be like at camp, though. I mean, they got 15. It's not quite 15, but there's a ton of picks that they have here. Maybe it is 15 picks.
I think it's 14 or 15. But I think the ones, especially at the beginning, that they made were great picks.
Yes.
Corey Coleman, the wide receiver from Baylor,
somebody.
has just been electric the last few years in that system. He's going to a place without, an answer, a quarterback right now, but they needed someone because all their guys keep leaving or being suspended. Right. So I thought Coleman was a great pick. He's compared to Antonio Brown. So if he's able to develop, they have a great one there. Then they took, with the first pick of the second round, Emmanuel Ogbah from Oklahoma State. They needed pass rush. He'll be able to do that. They doubled down then with our boy Carl Nassib from Penn State in the third round.
They were also excited about. Well, the Browns fans I talked to were really excited because I told them, look,
his work ethic's through the charts.
And that's what I said. And if you look at the Browns' history, they've had plenty of guys with tons of talent that haven't worked out. What they haven't had are the guys who, the natural talent. Obviously, these guys are being drafted in the NFL. There's a high level of natural talent there, but they need the guy who's just going to come in and work really hard for everything he gets, and that is definitely Carl Nassib. And so the guys I talked to were really excited about that pick, especially where they were able to get him.
They were able to get an offensive tackle in Sean Coleman in round 3, and his story was interesting. He actually was there at the draft, I believe, 2 years ago to announce a pick as someone who has fought cancer through St. Jude's, which the NFL and the draft has had ties to. And here he is hearing his name called at the draft, going to the Browns in the third round. Then the next pick, and probably one of the last ones we'll talk about the Browns, was Cody Kessler. He was a highly ranked quarterback at USC, never lit it up like some of the past Trojans quarterbacks have, but it's already been stated he's coming in with the chance to win the job outright.
Yeah, and honestly, Cody Kessler, USC's failings the last few years have hurt him because he is a big-time quarterback, but they're not being able to figure out the coaching situation and some other guys underperforming. Cody Kessler has a chance. I like that pick for them, and honestly, looking at he has RG3 there, and who knows what that's going to be, but he could definitely be the number 2 quarterback if RG3 is your starter, assuming week 1 and see how that plays out. But I like the Cody Kessler pick, again, especially where you were able to get him.
The last two guys with the Browns to talk about, Spencer Drango, one time thought to be one of the best offensive tackles in college football. He fell off a bit. The Baylor system catches up to you. You're not going to play like that in the NFL. He's going to move inside most likely with the Browns, but I think he's someone to watch. And then the last pick by the Browns, one of my favorite players in the draft because of who they compare him to, Scooby Wright III from Arizona. Zach Thomas is the one thrown out there because he's a small guy. He's only 6 foot. He's under 240. So that size limitations that are out there. But he is a player. He's a playmaker. He's a football guy. I think he's going to latch on. I think he's going to be a good player.
I think that's a perfect example, too, of a guy with not necessarily all the physical measurements that you would expect for a guy, but a guy whose heart is going to win over Cleveland or has the potential to if he can get on the field and make some plays.
The Chicago Bears, I thought, had a good top of the draft. They went Leonard Floyd in round 1, pass rusher from Georgia, Cody Whitehair, the guard from Kansas State, and Jonathan Bullard, the tackle from Florida. All three guys talked about very highly, expected late first into the second. Well, Bullard survived to the third, and they got him. Those 3 picks are the reason I thought the Bears were winners there. We already talked about the Cowboys, but I thought the Lions also had themselves a pretty good day. They got the offensive line help they needed in Taylor Decker. They stole A'Shaun Robinson.
Gosh, yes.
What an incredible pick by them. And I also want to mention that they doubled down at the tackle position and got our boy Anthony Zettel,
who's going
from Penn
home.
State.
He's a Michigan guy,
Right.
so I'm really happy for him.
But those first 2 picks, I mean, Taylor Decker, that's a fine pick. You know,
Yeah.
first rounder, he deserved to go in the first. That's a fine
Yep.
pick. But the A'Shaun Robinson really could be one of these
halfway
steals,
through the second round. That's a great pick.
of the draft. Jaguars, possibly the team I wanted to name as my winner, because they got, honestly, 2 of the top 5 players in the entire draft. In Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback from Florida State, and Miles Jack,
both on
the
the
linebacker
defensive
from
side too.
UCLA.
So it'll be interesting. They've added some offensive pieces over the last few years, but obviously they're confident with their offensive pieces because if you look, first pick, cornerback, second pick, linebacker, third pick, defensive end, fourth pick,
Tackle.
6th pick, linebacker, their 7th pick in the 6th round, they picked up a quarterback, and then round 7 was a defensive end.
So they went all defense except for a developmental quarterback. And they even say in the pick analysis that we're looking at here about Chad and the Jaguars quarterback situation. About Chad Henne has made a ton of money as a backup, but the Jags need to start planning for life after the Henne era. And talk about Allen has experience in the pro system. So Allen's obviously the developmental guy. He'll be the third string emergency quarterback. He'll be the practice squad type guy.
Right.
He's not going to beat out Chad. That's not what they got him for. But they have him as insurance for the future when Chad is gone. Who knows how much longer Chad will be playing. He signed a 2-year contract with the Jaguars, so hopefully he'll be able to finish that out with them. But I just think, looking at the top, especially the first 4 picks, Ramsey and Jack were just home runs.
Yeah.
And as long as Miles Jack stays healthy...
Supposedly, it came out like before the second round that he won't need microfracture surgery, at least right now. So that's huge.
So he was one of my favorite players in the entire draft, and the Jaguars got him in the second round.
Especially his first year at UCLA, he lined up everywhere. They'd put him at running back.
Yeah.
They'd put him at
Well, he's
like
an
tight
athletic
end.
freak.
Right. It was awesome.
And then the 2 defensive linemen, they got Ngakoue from Maryland and Day from Notre Dame. Got the big middle guy and the rush on the end.
Right.
I just
Sheldon Day. Again, I hate to give the Notre Dame guys credit, but when it's deserved, I really liked Sheldon Day. I think that's a solid pick in terms of value for what they were able to get and where they were able to get it and kind of add 2 pieces that they have already.
We talked about the Browns who had 14 or 15 picks. On the flip side of that were the Saints who only made 5 selections all weekend. But I think they did a lot with what they had. Especially their first 3 picks, I thought, were slam dunks. Sheldon Rankins, they've always had trouble with defensive linemen down there. Rankins out of Louisville was one of the best defensive tackles in the draft, and they got him with the 12th pick. They came back with 2 Ohio State guys back-to-back in round 2 with the 16th pick and the 30th pick in the second round. They went with Michael Thomas, who is going to have to attempt to replace the departure of their go-to guy over the years in... Oh, now I just blanked on his name.
Was it Colston?
Yeah, Marcus Colston. And then Von Bell, the defensive back from Ohio State. A lot of people thought he would be going much earlier in the second round, and he was one of the final picks of the second round. But those top 3 guys from the Saints, I thought they did themselves, with the few resources, I thought they did quite well. And then the last one was the Redskins. They got a receiving threat for Kirk Cousins and Josh Doctson. They grabbed another one of my favorite guys. You know, these West Coast linebackers are kind of a hybrid athletic freaks. And Miles Jack, who went to the Jaguars from UCLA, but Sua Cravens from USC is kind of this new age, too fast to always play linebacker, but too big and strong to always be strong safety. He's this hybrid guy, but I really liked him, and the Redskins took him, thankfully, before the Patriots, because supposedly New England was about to pounce on that. Washington took him in the second round. They also got Kendall Fuller, who was really, I thought more of a fringe first-round guy. He's the fourth Fuller brother to be in the NFL. He could end up being one of the best as long as he stays healthy. That's why he dropped to the third round. They also got themselves a backup quarterback in Nate Sudfeld and a nice running back in Keith Marshall from Georgia, who lasted to the seventh round. So another team I thought did well was the Redskins. But none of those teams were my overall winner. And my overall winner is actually the team that had the number one pick in the draft before trading it away. And we talked about them previously during the Laramie Tunsil, whatever you want to call that situation, when we talked about the Titans taking Jack Conklin. So getting him to shore up the offensive line, they now have Conklin and Taylor Lewan there to shore up the bookends and keep Marcus Mariota upright. They came back in the second round and added Kevin Dodd, a great pass rusher from Clemson. Then they added a Penn Stater, Austin Johnson, a big guy, probably a two-down guy, but he will help in run defense, and he gets to pair with Daquan Jones, also his, I think, mentor at Penn State. And then possibly easily one of the best picks in the draft, their third second-round pick 45 overall, they went with Heisman Trophy winner Derrick Henry from Alabama, and he could easily start for the Titans immediately over DeMarco Murray, who they traded for.
That's
so
funny.
DeMarco's got to be pretty unhappy. He probably never should have left Dallas. Things could be quite different if he had. But now you got Mariota in the second year. You got a young offensive line. You add Derrick Henry to the mix. You also have the big receiving threat that they added last year, and the guy, Dorial Green Beckham. And then you look at the defense. They added Dodd and Johnson to a team that showed at times some flashes, but obviously being the number one pick, the unit overall wasn't that great. I don't think they're going to be much this year, but I think they're definitely building, and I think this draft was a great step forward for them. I just really like the first four picks. You know, it's tough to really gauge what's happening in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round. You know, that's low risk, high reward there. But the first four, Conklin, Dodd, Johnson, and Henry, I thought the Titans did absolutely what they needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at those guys, they got help exactly where they need it, and you add that to the pieces they've been able to add last year, and you. Again, the expectations are going to be high there that they can start to turn things around. And that'll be interesting to kind of see how that plays out because Indianapolis, you know, supposedly should be getting better. And then the next one, you have Houston, who made the playoffs last year. And the Jaguars were also in our top, of amongst the winners in the draft here. So.
Yeah, I think the AFC South is radically improving, and we see that. A few years back, the NFC West was a laughingstock, and all of a sudden, the Seahawks and 49ers jumped up to the top. The 49ers fell off, but then the Cardinals came up to the top.
Right.
Now the Rams took the number one overall pick and got a quarterback. So you see the NFC West from laughingstock to great. Then it was the AFC South. Everyone's making fun of them. Now they're starting to rise back up. Well, I think the division that's going to be back at the bottom soon, and this is surprising after this last year, is the NFC South. I don't like much of what's going on in the South. We did talk about the Saints, who I thought had a good draft, but I thought their other three teams in that division did not help themselves, or at least as much as the Saints did and some of the other teams. I wasn't as high as Keanu Neal, who the Falcons took at pick 17. He's a safety out of Florida. I just look at some of their picks. Nothing jumped out to me that just said, wow, they made some big improvements. They didn't fill all the needs they were expected to. They didn't add any defensive linemen. They only added one offensive lineman and no guys that I'm like really like.
One
they're
offensive lineman from a team that had a terrible offensive line. Like I don't get that, but
I don't see them making massive improvements. And they started the year strong and they faded. Could this be the end of Matt Ryan and another new head coach? I don't know. I don't think. And Justin is definitely shaking his head to that. I don't think the Falcons are moving in the right direction.
Matty Ice is about to find his way out of Atlanta. I say that they'll probably win the Super Bowl this year. So
the other team, and probably a surprise, I don't think the Panthers had a very good draft. They went 15-1 last year. They ran through the playoffs, and they got beat up by the Broncos in the Super Bowl. And what have they done? Well, they got rid of Josh Norman because they didn't want to pay him, which is fine. I understand it's a business, but you got to have a backup plan. And I feel like they reached to kind of fill that void in James Bradbury and Darryl Worley. They also added a third cornerback in Zach Sanchez, but they added another defensive tackle, which I know BPA, but at some point, like you just took the option of Star Lotulelei. You have Kawan Short. You have Paul Soliai. You have 3 big defensive tackles.
Right.
And I know the good teams are always looking at another, like they're looking a year away from now. That's fine. If Kawan Short leaves and you have Vernon Butler to plug in, that's great. You got the defensive tackle taken care of. But there's plenty of other positions that you needed help, and I just don't think the Panthers did too much. Where's the offensive lineman? Where's your running back?
Yeah.
I agree. For a team that's looking to take it to the next level, it's hard to say that for a team that went to the Super Bowl. I don't think they addressed the needs that they had there.
And the last one of the losers before we get to the worst team is the Buccaneers. I'm split on Vernon Hargreaves because at the time I wanted Miami to possibly take him until Tunsil kept falling, but there's some questions about his size, especially his height and arm length, and transferring to the NFL game. He's the cornerback out of Florida. Noah Spence, a guy, somewhat local product, went to Bishop McDevitt in Harrisburg, started at Ohio State out there for 3 years before having to go to Eastern Kentucky because of Austin Field things. If those flare up and come back to bite him, that's a wasted second-round pick by the Bucs. And then the biggest head-scratcher, trading up 15 spots to draft a kicker in the second round. Roberto Aguayo, who everyone says he's the most accurate kicker in college history, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, he has maybe have been perfect from 39 and under, but he's 14 of 22 from 40+.
Yeah.
How does that get you drafted in the second round?
Right. Yeah, I don't get it at all.
NFL kickers make their money 40+.
Right.
And this guy is no better than some of the other guys that are out there. I just don't see it.
Right.
I don't care if he's automatic
He
from
never
39
he
and
never
under.
missed an extra point, which isn't the same as the NFL's extra point.
Right. So at one point I was like, I liked Hargreaves, I like Spence. And then I looked and I was like, the rest of the stuff is just kind of like, all right, whatever. And trading up to get that kicker, and then you're like, well, Spence had all those off-the-field issues. And I know, I don't want to be a hypocrite because I know Tunsil had those for the Dolphins too. I'm not talking much about the Dolphins, but it's just, at first glance, I was like, that's not too bad at the top. And then I was like, well, I think there was a lot of more chance for these to fail than to come out on top. And the kicker thing, I'll never get that. So I didn't like 3 of the 4 NFC South teams. But the team that I thought did the worst was the San Diego Chargers. We talked about Bosa off the top. A 3rd overall pick for Bosa, I don't see that at all. I like their second pick, Hunter Henry, the tight end from Arkansas. I think he's the best pick they made. They took USC center Max Turk, Ohio State linebacker Josh Perry, another linebacker from Akron, a specialist. They took J.J. Watt's brother. I don't know, maybe they want some of that mojo flown, but none of these players jumped out to me that they're going to be immediate impact guys. Even Bosa, I'm not high on him. If he turns out to be, the second coming and an incredible player, that this will be completely proving me wrong. But I don't know, there was nothing about the Chargers draft that thrilled me, I guess, other than I like the Hunter Henry pick.
Right, yeah, I agree. I honestly think in terms of value, I like the Donovan Clark at the very end, adding a guard, which is something that they need.
Offensive line
help.
Well, we talked about them possibly taking a tackle.
USC is great, but yeah, I think they should have gone with one of the keystone tackles. That's my take. I know that's still hit or miss.
They take Stanley or Tunsil, and they're talking about an entire different draft.
Right, even if they didn't want to take Tunsil, I think if they take Stanley in the first round and then still get Hunter Henry in the second round, all right, you've added 2 key pieces there up front. And, I know Hunter Henry's not exactly a blocking, tight end exactly. But, I think it puts a whole different spin on their draft.
All right, so that's our take on the NFL draft. I know I apologize not talking much about the 6 teams we usually talk about, but they're all right in the middle,
And that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Sometimes it's nice to talk about the other teams, so that's what we're able to do. On the next episode, show 209, it'll be 2 weeks from now, Sunday, May 15th. We're going to take next Sunday off to hang out with our wives and moms and for Mother's Day, but we'll be back in 2 weeks on May 15th. We had said that we were going to talk about the Flyers, end of the Flyer season, the off season, and the upcoming year this fall, just because there's a lot of hype surrounding the guys in the system and building on the success that they had this year, not expecting to make the playoffs, and then really coming on at the end of February through the end of the year. You can always get more from us at jmnjrradio.com or joemaysandjraff.com. Be sure to follow all of us on Twitter at jmnjr_radio, at joemaysandjraff, at jmflyer1454, and at Mr_Raffoff. I know you've got a couple shout-outs, or at least one.
Yeah, shout out to my mom who has a birthday on Tuesday. So happy birthday.
Also, 2 happy anniversaries to send out there. One to Kelly's parents, the Rosses, celebrated just a few days ago. And to my parents, Bill and Karen will be celebrating their anniversary in just a few days on May 5th. And also, we won't be broadcasting on this day this year, but I always mark it on or around the time. And that is Wednesday, May 4th is Star Wars Day. So make sure everyone celebrates that day. And
I'll make sure to say it to all the students who will roll their eyes.
Definitely, that's the best way to do it. So anything else to add?
No.
All right. So thanks for joining us. This wraps up the 208th episode of the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show.
We hope you tune in every Sunday for our Take on Sports. Until next time, I'm J-Raff.
And I'm Joe Mays. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Joe Mays and J-Raff Show. Tune in every Sunday for the latest sports discussions from Joe and Justin. Each episode is available live on Ustream or Mixler and can be downloaded or streamed on iTunes and SoundCloud. You can interact with Joe and Justin on Facebook and Twitter, and stay up to date with the guys at joemaysandjraff.com. The Joe Mays and J-Raff Show is part of the JMNJR Radio Network. For more info, visit jmnjrradio.com.